Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. We start from Russia, which has asked the US to withdraw nuclear weapons deployed outside its territory. A document accidentally published by a NATO-affiliated body revealed 6 European states house American weapons. The now deleted document says US nuclear weapons are being stored in Belgium, Germany, Italy, Netherlands and Turkey. Russia's permanent representative in Vienna, Mikhail Ulyanov, says Moscow places its nuclear weapons exclusively on its own territory. The American director of the Arms Control Association, Kingston Rife, says the presence of the US nuclear weapons in Europe is not a surprise. Rife says it has long been a fairly open secret. NATO has warned Russia of consequences if it does not return to complying with the INF Treaty by August the 2nd. Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said time is running out to save the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. The US and the Soviet Union signed the agreement in 1987 to ban short and medium-range missiles. Stoltenberg said Russia's decision to develop new weapons are a clear violation of the arms accord. The US announced it would suspend its obligations under the treaty in February, accusing Russia of breaching its terms. Russia denies the allegations but suspended its part in the treaty last month after presenting proof the US was working on long-range missiles. Ukraine has confirmed its commitment to an indefinite ceasefire in Donbass starting from July the 21st. The eastern Donbass border region has been scarred with cross-border fighting with Russia and is seen as a flashpoint that could trigger war. The ceasefire has been approved by the Trilateral Contact Group brokering peace for East Ukraine. The government spokesperson, Daria Olifa, said the contact group has confirmed the implementation of the Minsk agreements. Olifa said these sides have pledged to provide secure access to the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission. Earlier, OSCE Special Representative Martin Sajdik said the contact group had negotiated the terms of an indefinite ceasefire. At The Hague, the International Court of Justice has rejected an acquittal plea filed by India in the Kulbhushan Jadhav spying case. The ICJ also dismissed an Indian request to annul the death sentence imposed by a military court in Pakistan. The court said both parties agree Jadhav is an Indian national. It said Pakistan should provide consular access to Jadhav as the Vienna Convention does not deny access to espionage case prisoners. Attorney General Anwar Mansoor said the verdict is a clear vindication of Pakistan's position.
The court also recalls that it is not to be presumed that partial or total annulment of conviction or sentence provides the sole and necessary remedy in cases of violations of Article 36 of the Vienna Convention. Thus, the court finds that this submission is made by India cannot be upheld.
Pakistan had arrested Kulbhushan Jadhav in March 2016 while trying to illegally enter the country from Iran. And now we'll move on to the US, where the Congress lawmakers have approved 3 resolutions blocking President Donald Trump's planned sale of weapons to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. 2 of the resolutions were passed with 238 votes, while a third was approved with 237. Trump, who sought good relations with Riyadh, has pledged to veto the move. Overturning a presidential veto requires a 2/3 majority in both the House and the Senate. Trump had announced plans to sell missiles and other weapons worth $8 billion to Saudi Arabia, the UAE and Jordan. Tehran has accused the United States of economic terrorism against Iranians by using harsh sanctions. Foreign Minister Javad Zarif said Iran has made progress in the empowerment and equality of people despite unlawful embargoes. Zarif said U.S. travel restrictions on Iranian diplomats and their families living in New York are inhumane. Speaking at the United Nations, Zarif said these sanctions can restrict Tehran's ability to achieve sustainable development goals.
The unlawful extraterritorial economic sanctions imposed on Iran by the United States in violation of Security Council Resolution 2231 represent the greatest threat to the achievement of sustainable development goals of Iran.
Tensions between Iran and the U.S. increased after Washington's unilateral withdrawal from the 2015 nuclear accord. Now moving on to Turkey, which has asked the U.S. to reverse its decision to stop F-35 fighter jet sales to Ankara. Its foreign ministry says the illegitimate move can harm strategic ties between the two NATO allies. The ministry asked the U.S. to honor its friendship with Turkey with actions instead of rhetoric. Earlier, U.S. President Donald Trump said he will stop the sales of the advanced warplanes to Ankara over its purchase of the Russian S-400 missile. Trump said Turkey can't have both American and Russian equipment. Ankara began receiving the missile defense system last week, despite the U.S. warnings. More stories to follow, but right after a short break. Stay tuned with Indus News. Welcome back. The rebel coalition in Syria claims Moscow has deployed special ground forces in the country's northwest to seize opposition strongholds. In an interview, they said no Russian ground forces had fought alongside the government on the front line until now. The coalition claims the deployment came only after Syrian troops were unable to make any significant headway. The government forces regained the Humaymat hilltop from rebels last week after the intervention and successful advance of allied troops. War monitors say the government forces have captured over 70 houses in Ghouta, a town in southwestern Syria. The UN says over 300,000 civilians fled the battle after dozens of villages and towns came under attack. An Afghan colonel has been killed in an insider attack in central Afghanistan. The defense ministry says an Afghan soldier killed Colonel Mateen Mushtaba during a security assessment in Karabakh district. The ministry says Mateen was attacked by an enemy soldier who infiltrated Afghan military ranks. The assailant was killed in retaliatory fire. The Taliban have claimed the responsibility, saying US soldiers also died in the attack. But the NATO-led mission says no US or coalition troops were killed or wounded. Earlier, Taliban had killed 18 Afghan soldiers in clashes in western Badghis province. Canadian and EU leaders are negotiating to expand their comprehensive economic and trade agreement. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and EU Council President Donald Tusk said they will strengthen their bilateral relationship. In a meeting with Trudeau on the sidelines of the Canada-EU summit, Tusk called Ottawa the EU's closest transatlantic partner. Canada's Prime Minister said its cooperation with Brussels is an example for the world.
President Tusk has been a good friend, a strong ally, and an extraordinarily powerful representative for Europeans who believe that working together and achieving great things only happens if we stay open and confident.
The trade pact between Europe and Canada went into effect in mid-2017 and has so far been ratified by 13 of the 28 EU states. The CETA removes tariffs on nearly all goods and services between Canada and Europe. Since the accord was signed, EU exports to Canada have risen 15%. In her farewell speech, British Prime Minister Theresa May has said compromise remains the best way to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. May will step down next week. UK Premier Theresa May said the nuclear deal between Iran and the US must be protected despite challenges. May said she is worried about the state of politics, warning a willingness to compromise has become unfashionable. Talking about Brexit, she said it should be delivered in a way which brings the country back together. The Premier said a good deal was negotiated to leave the European Union, but Parliament did not back it with a majority. Boris Johnson, the front-runner to succeed May, plans to seek changes to the deal. May was forced to resign when she failed to unite the nation behind her plan to leave the European Union on schedule in March. Britain is due to leave the bloc on October the 31st. The brother of a suicide bomber who blew himself up at a concert in Manchester has been extradited from Libya to the United Kingdom. Hashim Abdi is suspected of aiding the attack that killed 22 people and injuring more than 500 in 2017. Salman Abdi blew himself up at the end of the concert in the deadliest terror attack in Britain in 12 years. The Manchester police chief says they have arrested Hashim Abdi and he will appear in the court today. Britain's Prime Minister Theresa May has welcomed the move. Now moving on, a US court has sentenced one of the world's most powerful drug lords, Joaquin Guzman, to life in prison. The court has ordered Guzman, better known as El Chapo, to pay $12.6 billion in forfeiture. He has been charged with a host of crimes spanning a quarter century. El Chapo was convicted in February on charges of trafficking hundreds of tons of illegal narcotics into the US. The charges also include money laundering and weapons-related offenses. He has been moved to a supermax federal prison in Colorado. Before he was finally captured in 2016, Guzman twice escaped from maximum security prisons in Mexico. He was extradited to the United States to face trial in January 2017. Italian and the US police have arrested 18 people in a coordinated crackdown on a Sicilian mafia family. The crackdown is part of the investigation into the Inzerillo clan and its ally, the Gambino family. The suspects face a string of charges, including membership of mafia, aggravated extortion, and fraud. More than 200 police officers took part in the crackdown in Sicily. In the US, FBI and Italian officers raided 3 properties in New Jersey, Staten Island, and Philadelphia. The clan is trying to regroup and rebuild its power base after years of exile in the US. The World Health Organization has declared a public health emergency over the Ebola outbreak in Democratic Republic of Congo. It is considered a rare declaration used for the gravest epidemics. WHO Chief Tedros Ghebreyesus says he has accepted the advice of his advisory board to invoke the emergency provision. He says it is time for the world to take notice of the epidemic. The International Federation of Red Cross and the Red Crescent Societies have welcomed the decision. The Red Cross says, hopefully, it will garner world attention to this crisis. Over 1,600 people have died from Ebola since last August. In the United States, a resurgent seal population in Cape Cod is attracting great white sharks to the popular tourist destination. There has already been one fatal shark attack in the peninsula last year. Authorities have stepped up emergency response efforts in an attempt to prevent more tragedies. Details in this report.
Last September, Massachusetts saw its first shark-related death in 83 years. A rising seal population is attracting great white sharks to the Cape Cod Peninsula in droves. The Atlantic White Shark Conservancy reports 100 sightings this summer alone. Authorities are trying to control the problem by enhancing their emergency responses. Beach authorities have been equipped with specialized medical kits to cope with potential attacks.
I know there's a task force that's looking at different options. I'm interested to see what they come up with. I do think There's not anything that's going to be 100% a deterrent. But I'd like to see what the examination of all the options looks like to see if there is something that can be done that can make it safer out there.
Surfing is such a big part of Cape Cod's culture that most people have not changed their beach-going habits. Some have opted to use electronic shark repellent devices. Regardless, presence of one of the ocean's top apex predators in large numbers presents a very real danger.
Iceland is trying to bring back trees cut down by the Vikings who colonized it. The country is believed to be the least forested in Europe, but now the government is increasing its efforts to increase the forest cover. More in this report.
Europe faced an intense heat wave triggered by climate change this year, with temperatures soaring to 40 degrees Celsius. This has turned many global warming skeptics into believers. Many countries, including Iceland, are rigorously fighting the threat. The country has planted nearly 3 million trees since 2015.
This is one of the worst examples of soil erosion in Iceland, on lowland. Hafnarsandur it's called. And here we are planning a project, afforestation project, to stabilize the soil and protect the town nearby.
The lack of trees has caused soil erosion and desertification. Instead of growing native birch trees, Iceland is more focused on planting foreign species, including pines, using a Finnish-designed tube-shaped tool.
The pine and spruce, that's also from Icelandic seeds. Original, they come from Alaska. But now we have 30, 40, 50-year-old trees giving us seeds.
Harsh climate in Iceland is a big obstacle to recover forest cover, but the government has made afforestation one of its top priorities.
A family in Cuba makes musical instruments from antique furniture found in demolition sites or in rubbish. These instruments are then sold on to schools. The details in this report.
Recently, Cuba has introduced traditional music courses to its syllabus, but the country doesn't have the resources to produce musical instruments on its own. So, in an unprecedented move, the government has made an agreement with the Guayabo luthiers.
Up until now, we have made some 550 instruments. Our instruments are in every school in the country.
It's difficult for private artisans to purchase wood suitable for the musical instruments. But the Guayabo artisans have found a way around this obstacle. They make instruments using raw materials. The instruments are made in the courtyard of the family's house on the outskirts of Havana.
The luthiers in the world are virtually all solitary wolves working on their own. In our case, it's part of family inheritance, like it usually is around the world. But we have become a group within the family who are dedicated to making musical instruments. These musical instruments reach schools through a socio-cultural project.
Everywhere around the world, luthiers are solitary workers, but in Cuba, it's a family business.
Lows and the highs of the business world now. Asian stock markets have fallen amid renewed tensions on the US-China trade front. Mainland Chinese shares and Japan's Nikkei indices slipped significantly. Japan's exports have dropped 6.7% in June, down on expectations. Australia's ASX 200, South Korea's Kospi and Hong Kong's Hang Seng also traded lower. In a surprise move, South Korea's central bank cut its key interest rate for the first time in 3 years. This came amid a struggling economy and escalating trade tensions with Japan. Meanwhile, Australian jobs data showed the country produced a net 500 jobs in June, clearly missing predictions. Oil prices rose in Asian trading. Gold prices have surged, while oil traded flat in Asian trading after the IMF said the US dollar was overvalued by 6 to 12%. And now the sports updates. Nigeria have defeated Tunisia by 1-0 in the third-place playoff at the Africa Cup of Nations. Playing in Cairo's Al Salam Stadium, striker Odion Ighalo scored the only goal in the third minute of the match. Tunisia established a foothold in the game, but the Eagles of Carthage failed to capitalize on the many goal-scoring chances they created. With this victory, Nigeria has finished third for the 8th time in the tournament's history. Meanwhile, Senegal and Algeria will face each other in Friday's final. Asian football teams have learned who they will face in the next qualifying round of the FIFA World Cup. The draw for the Asian qualifiers' second round of 2022 World Cup was made in the Malaysian capital, Kuala Lumpur. 40 teams are split into 8 groups, with the winners and 4 best-placed runner-ups progressing to the next round. China was drawn in Group A, where it will face Syria, the Philippines, Maldives and Guam, who battled through the first round. Middle East rivals Iran and Iraq will face off in Group C, while South and North Korea are in Group H. And now the weather situation from around the globe. That's all for now. For further updates, stay tuned to Indus News.